lucky because I think we're, if you like, riding the crest of a wave, those of us who are pro-cycling, who are involved in cycling. It feels as though, in some sense, we're in the right place at the right time. Which, when you consider that the bicycle is essentially a 130-year-old piece of Victorian technology, is kind of ironic. But here we are, its time has come again. I think the great thing for, well, all of us, but for particularly someone like me who works in the media, is that cycling in the last few years has become, if you like, a good news story. And that's my central theme today. And that's happened not only within my adult lifetime, I would say, but within probably the last 5 or 10 years, that the perception of cycling has shifted really quite radically from being almost, somebody who's a nuisance on the road to, and if you like, an activity of eccentrics and cranks, to, if you like, being seen as being an integral part of the solution to the transport problem. And that is a huge shift, I think. I mean, it's almost easy to forget how big a difference that is from where we were 10 years ago, and almost hard to get your head around. We were in the middle of the Scott inquiry, the Arms to Iraq inquiry, and it was very noticeable that whenever you saw, whenever there was coverage in probably the Telegraph or the Daily Mail of that inquiry, the picture that would go with it was always Sir Richard Scott arriving at his inquiry in tweeds and on his bicycle with clips around his trousers. And it may have been paranoid of me, but I always felt that this sort of portrayal, which of course was, not at all relevant to anything to do with the inquiry, was sort of covertly designed to convey the message that no matter what the British state's involvement in supplying arms to Saddam Hussein had been, the person conducting this inquiry was, at best, a kind of rather daffy bicycle clip wearing old fruitcake, or possibly, a dangerously subversive crank. And that's where we were, I suppose, 10, maybe 15 years ago now. Fast forward to the last couple of years, and a figure like David Cameron. And of course, he's taken plenty of flack and if you like, a certain amount of kind of teasing in the media about his cycling. And, the whole thing of being accused of that it's more for show than for go, and it's just parading his green credentials, and that, the ridicule of the fact that there's a car behind, carrying his papers and clothes to Parliament, coming on behind him. But I feel there's a qualitative difference, and that is that he's not actually being ridiculed for being a cyclist. I mean, he may be being attacked for possibly what's perceived as hypocrisy, but it's not as a cyclist per se. In fact, rather the reverse. I think David Cameron has been seen as being rather admirable in certain ways, practicing the green message he preaches. And more to the point, perhaps, that cycling itself is no longer seen as making its rider seem hopelessly out of touch, but rather the opposite, quite modern, with it, progressive, in touch even. Which is not to credit David Cameron with altering perceptions of cycling single-handedly. If anything, you could say that he's exploiting, for his own sort of image purposes, change that's already going on around him. But there is, I think, a sort of welcome symbiosis there, and it does make a difference, I think, to to all of us who care about commuting cyclists. Anyway, enough of my PhD thesis about changing images of cyclists. The real point, I suppose, is that that image has changed massively in the last decade, and it's happened almost under our noses, almost by stealth, I feel at times. And it can be very hard to pin down and quantify exactly what that is. Rose Addis, who's the head of the Transport for London Centre for Cycling Excellence, I got it right, Cycling Centre for Excellence, I always forget which way around it is, said to me not long ago that there's just something in the air about cycling, which I think is a kind of maddeningly vague phrase, but at the same time you know exactly what she means. And so I suppose our job as people involved in cycling is, if possible, to give shape and form and substance to that kind of ethereal essence of, you know, this sort of pro-cycling mood that there is. That what has pushed cycling up the agenda has been the whole panoply of environmental concerns: climate change, carbon emissions, congestion, pollution, and there's sort of growing consensus that, you know, we're kind of reaching the end of the road in terms of what's sustainable in the way of motorised private transport and the hydrocarbon economy generally. So cycling, I think, has thus come to be seen not only by professionals but by the public as an important part of the solution to that crisis. But while, as a caveat to that, I suppose what I feel also is that while that kind of green revival of cycling is something we should be grateful for, I feel we should also be aware of the potential pitfalls it contains. I feel that there's a slight threat for cycling of being, if you like, pigeonholed as a part of a kind of green transport alternative or as a part of a green lifestyle choice. And I suppose that is my sort of microcosmic illustration of my larger concern about you know, cycling being too closely identified simply as a green transport issue. And I think that you know, the risk of that is that it comes to be seen as something which is just completely voluntary and perhaps even rather pious as a lifestyle choice. Yeah, it's a bit like, so, you know, leaving your car at home and taking the bike to work is a bit like kind of adding bran to your muesli. You know, very virtuous, but rather sort of worthy. You know, I feel now that what we need to get across is that cycling is not just for do-gooders, but really for everyone. It's you know, not something you do because you want to save the planet. It's what you do because it just makes sense. It's, you know, fast, efficient, convenient, healthy and fun. And so what I want to see ultimately, I suppose, is, for want of a better word, a kind of normalisation of cycling, where it's become so much part of the natural, everyday choice that people make about transport that it becomes unremarkable, if you like, and almost invisible. I sometimes think we're at a point now where we need to break out of our own ghetto, which is, if you like, a kind of mindset that we've inhabited in cycling's wilderness years, if you want to think of it that way. Which is not, none of this, by the way, is to take a sideswipe at you know, any of the kind of campaigners and lobbyists who've been sort of working for and defending cyclists' interests all down the years, who I think are, you know, justly reaping some reward for it now. But I think we often tend to be in the habit of instinctively adopting a slightly defensive posture. You know, we tend just to talk about cyclists' rights, for instance, without necessarily also addressing the responsibilities that cyclists might have. A good example, you know, an old chestnut I know, but would be that we could be, I think, more proactive in campaigning for cyclists to get training. I know training is big at the moment, and that's great, but specifically to comply with traffic regulations. I don't think it should be our business any longer to be making excuses for cyclists, say, who jump red lights, by saying things about, you know, hostile road environments and lack of cycling infrastructure. I don't feel that argument washes anymore, and I don't think it serves our purpose to be in that defensive mode. I think, you know, we have to sort of, in a way, confront those issues and be seen to do so, rather than painting ourselves into a corner where we increasingly sort of defend the indefensible. And that is a big issue. Simply, as more people use the road, cyclists are more visible, so cyclist behaviour too is more visible to motorists. Anyway, that, as I say, is not intended as a negative note at all to finish on. I suppose what it is about all of us ditching the habits of speaking for an embattled minority, and instead of assuming that we're speaking for that minority, instead assume that we're speaking for and to everyone.
Feed off me and I'll feed off you, take it to the top.